Krishna 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 Hare Krishna 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 Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om 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 Surabhyaya Namaha
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 Mukam karoti vasalam pagum langayate girim Yat kripatamaham bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Yat kripatamaham bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Welcome to our daily Bhagavatam class. And we continue our reading from Canto number 1, chapter number 2, entitled Divinity and Divine Service. Today it is text number
7.
Yes, text number 7. Another very well-known verse. Vasudeve
Vasudeve
Bhagavati
Bhagavati
Bhakti Yoga
Bhakti Yoga
Prayojitaha
Prayojitaha
Janayati
Janayati
Ashu
Ashu
Vairagyam
Vairagyam
Yanam
Jnanam
Cha
Cha
Yad
Yad
Ahaitukam
Ahaitukam
Vasudeve Bhagavati
Vasudeve Bhagavati
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam
Vasudeve Bhagavati
Vasudeve Bhagavati
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam
Vasudeve Bhagavati
Vasudeve Bhagavati
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam
Bolun.
वासुदेवे भगवती
Vasudeve Bhagavati
भक्ति योग प्रयोजिता
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
जनयत्याशु वैराग्यम
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
ज्ञानञ्च यदहेतुकम्
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam
वासुदेवे भगवती
Vasudeve Bhagavati
भक्ति योगः प्रयोजितः
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
जनयता सुवैराग्यम्
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
ज्ञानं च यद् अहेतुकम्
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam
वासुदेवे भगवती
Vasudeve Bhagavati
भक्ति योग प्रयोजितः
Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha
जनयत्याशु वैराग्यम
Janayatyashu Vairagyam
ज्ञानं च यदहैतुकम्
Jnanam Chayadahaitukam Vasudeve
Vasudeve
unto Krishna
Unto Krishna
Bhagavati
Bhagavati
unto the personality of Godhead
Unto the personality of Godhead
Bhakti Yoga
Bhakti Yoga
contact of devotional service
Contact of devotional service
Prayojitaha
Prayojitaha
being applied
Being applied
Janayati,
Janayati,
does produce.
does produce.
Ashu,
Ashu,
very soon.
very soon.
Vairagyam,
Vairagyam,
detachment.
detachment.
Jnanam,
Jnanam,
knowledge.
knowledge.
Cha,
Cha,
and
and
yat,
yat,
that which.
that which.
Ahaitukam,
Ahaitukam,
causeless.
causeless.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki.
Jai.
By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. Kindly repeat after me. By rendering devotional service
By rendering devotional service
unto the personality of Godhead,
unto the personality of Godhead,
Sri Krishna,
Sri Krishna,
one immediately acquires
one immediately acquires
causeless knowledge
causeless knowledge
and detachment
and detachment
from the world.
from the world.
Purport. Those who consider devotional service to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna to be something like material emotional affairs may argue that in the revealed scriptures, sacrifice, charity, austerity, knowledge, mystic powers, and similar other processes of transcendental realization are recommended. According to them, bhakti, or the devotional service of the Lord, is meant for those who cannot perform the high-grade activities. Generally, it is said that the bhakti cult is meant for the Shudras, Vaishyas, and the less intelligent women class. But that is not the actual fact. The bhakti cult is the topmost of all transcendental activities, and therefore it is simultaneously sublime and easy. It is sublime for the pure devotees who are serious about getting in contact with the Supreme Lord. And it is easy for the neophytes who are just on the threshold of the house of bhakti. To achieve the contact of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is a great science, and it is open for all living beings, including the Shudras, Vaishyas, women, and even those lower than the low-born Shudras. So what to speak of the higher class men, like the qualified Brahmanas and the great self-realized kings. The other high-grade activities designated as sacrifice, charity, austerity, etc., are all corollary factors following the pure and scientific bhakti cult. Translation again. By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. A very important instruction in this verse. It's one of those verses that one can and should memorize, and it is very clearly establishing how the cult of bhakti, or the process of pure devotional service, is the topmost process, which, when performed properly, will give these two results, in that one will become detached, disinterested in material activities, in the material world, and one will be gradually more and more situated in transcendental knowledge. That is very logical when we come to understand that bhakti is the natural quality, the natural and original constitutional position of all living entities. And it becomes awakened when we are fortunate to come in contact with those who have bhakti, with those who are practicing devotional service. Krishna, as we know, is described as that personality who is Satchit Ananda Vigraha. Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha. And the living entity is also having these same qualities. This awakening of transcendental knowledge can actually take place very quickly by the mercy of the Vaishnavas, or the mercy of the Lord himself. One nice example that comes to mind, when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in Jagannath Puri, we know that King Prataparudra was the king at that time, very powerful and very qualified as a Prabhupada makes reference actually to kings who are self-realized. He was a great Vaishnava actually, and he had a strong desire to meet or to have darshan of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's all nicely explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. When the proposal was first brought forth to Lord Chaitanya, he immediately rejected the idea. And but the devotees were quite persistent. Devotees are meant to be persistent, but sometimes they become overly persistent. In any event, they again approached Lord Chaitanya, and he again refused, and on one such occasions he even threatened, if you bring this up, if you bring up this matter again, I will leave Jagannath Puri. So there was one great personality whom we all know by the name of Ramananda Roy, who had just retired. Lord Chaitanya had met him in South India, as we know, in Madras, and had this wonderful exchange. Although he was dealing with government matters, he was highly realized, and Lord Chaitanya had requested him, you please join me in Jagannath Puri, which he eventually did. And then because he had a close relationship with Lord Chaitanya, he brought up again the point. And then the Lord explained to him, actually I cannot meet the king, because at that time, 500 years ago, the custom was, social custom was very strict. But he said, actually he had told, you give the king some of my cloth. And then he also allowed, okay, I will not see the king, but I can see his son. So it was arranged that the son of King Prataparudra would come. And when he came to the quarters where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was staying, he was a young boy, maybe in his teens, maybe 13, 14. And he was dressed in dhoti with nice Vaishnav tilak. He had nice tilak today. And he was, Krishna, he is referred to as Navayovanam, eternally youthful personality. So immediately Lord Chaitanya thought of Lord Krishna, and he became overwhelmed in emotion, and he embraced this young boy. And he was, of course, it's not an ordinary thing to be the son of a king and to be the son of a Vaishnava king, but he was naturally a pious boy, but immediately as soon as he came in contact with Lord Chaitanya, and so many devotees were witnessing this event, he immediately began to manifest very rare symptoms of ecstatic love of Krishna. And that particular example shows how it is simply a question of awakening what is dormant actually in everyone's heart. So there's a nice verse also in the again Chaitanya Charitamrita where that point is being explained. Krishna Bhakti Janmamul Hoy Sadhu Sangha. This awakening of devotional service happens when we are fortunate to associate with Vaishnavas. And that same verse actually explains that Krishna Bhakti or Krishna Prema, the goal or the ultimate destination of our practice of bhakti, which is developing pure love of God, also happens by the same process. That same process of associating with Vaishnavas. So this is the power of bhakti. Similar event took place when Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was again in Jagannath Puri, and who was that great Pandit? No, in Jagannath Puri. Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya. Yes, you must be reading your Chaitanya Charitamrita. Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya was, he had met hundreds of, if not thousands of disciples, but he was an impersonalist. And I'm sure you've heard that Leela or pastime. But the same point we can say was demonstrated in that by associating with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by hearing about the glories of devotional service, he became so convinced and so we could say dedicated to the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that whenever he would see rather the word mukti in the Shastra, he would want to change it, or which is something of course we cannot do. But so this verse is mentioning how all other processes, and that is explained of course in the Bhagavad Gita, lead ultimately to the process of bhakti or devotional service, and that simply by following this process one will not in any way be lacking in knowledge, rather one will acquire the topmost knowledge, because in the process of let's say Mayavad or impersonalist process, that whole realm is actually absent, isn't it? Mayavadis are very strong in argument, but they are very dry in terms of understanding the higher realm, which are, this is actually the we could say the uniqueness. It is only within the cult or the practice of bhakti that one is allowed to to enter into these very high realms, which are, of course, nicely described in the pastimes, especially of the residents of Vrindavan. So this verse is again establishing that simply by rendering, by knowing about Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and by engaging, Prabhupada would say, in any of the 9 processes of bhakti or devotional service, one can actually become completely self-realized. Either 1, 2, or a combination of the processes of devotional service. And that is why Bhagavatam is so important to actually share or give or introduce to people, because that is the essence, actually. The essence ultimately of dharma is bhakti, isn't it? And that is what is delineated in the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So in the purport, Prabhupada also mentions that to achieve the contact of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, is a great science, and it is open for all living beings. And sometimes we see examples and we hear descriptions. Here it says all living entities, but it's not only for human beings. We also know about the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya while going to Vrindavan and the forest of Jharkhand, your place. We visited that place, actually. The footprints of Lord Chaitanya are still there, and people, they go. And such is the power of those who are fully and completely awakened to Krishna consciousness, that they can awaken those sentiments even in those who are not human beings, like animals. And there's also, to further demonstrate that, I think you've possibly heard of that wonderful pastime also of when the devotees of Navadvip would travel every year to Jagannath Puri, maybe 300, 400 or 500 devotees together. It would take them at least 1 month to walk. They had to every night find a place and take rest after taking prasadam. Anyways, during one of those journeys to Jagannath Puri, one of the main persons who was helping in different ways, actually, he was materially well off, so he was sponsoring, we could say, the journey. He was paying the toll whenever, because in Bengal, Shivananda Sen, there are many rivers, so you have to cross by boat, by ferry. So as they went along, this one dog was following, and then actually when the custom, a little bit like Padiyatra, also a little bit like our Dharma Gogram Yatra, you need an advance party, An advance party goes and arranges where devotees will be staying and where they can cook, who will be cooking, all these things. So when they arrived at this one particular place, and somehow Shivananda Sen had become somewhat attached to this dog, and not seeing the dog, he inquired, whether anyone had actually given prasadam to the dog, and they had not. And therefore, the dog had gone, I guess, looking for prasadam somewhere. So it's nice to explain that he immediately sent out 20 men to look for the dog, and they came back, not finding the dog. So he fasted himself. If the dog cannot have prasadam, why I should take prasadam? So he fasted, and then I think shortly after that they reached Jagannath Puri, and to everyone's surprise, the dog was sitting in front of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and chanting Hare Krishna in his own way. Lord Chaitanya was throwing morsels of prasadam at him, and then it is explained that the next day actually the dog was not to be seen. So when Prabhupada would visit New Vrindavan, in New Vrindavan, it's quite common in any village or a farm community that you have cats and dogs, and Prabhupada would comment at times that these are not ordinary dogs, not ordinary cats, because they're taking prasadam, and we know that they are at least they are guaranteed, because of having taken prasadam even once, guaranteed a human form in their next life. That is the power of prasadam. That is the power of bhakti or devotional service. So, so therefore, the whole mood and mentality of Vaishnavas who come to know of how powerful and how potent is this process of bhakti, and how that is everyone's constitutional right and constitutional position. Therefore, the mood and mentality of Vaishnavas is to share this, to give this, to distribute this knowledge, and to give to as many people as possible this opportunity of taking up to the process of devotional service. Because it is our attachment in the material world that is keeping us in the material world. So here is very nicely explaining that immediately, very quickly, one will become detached simply by taking up to the process of bhakti. And not only detached, but one will be, it is Krishna, actually, Krishna who helps us to awaken our real love for him, which is actually dormant within everyone's heart. And unless we begin to develop such transcendental knowledge, then we are caught up with so-called material knowledge, which is not actually knowledge, but which is keeping us in ignorance, in ignorance of our original constitutional identity and activity as the spirit soul meant to be engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. So, let's see here. How many have learned this verse? Vasudevi, Bhagavati? A few? Quite a few, yeah. So the translation, again, by rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Here it says, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. Sometimes new devotees surprise themselves. I also experienced that in the beginning, we start coming to a temple, we start to associate with devotees, we start to read Prabhupada's books, and if we're fortunate, we live in a temple for some time to get more, we could say, concentrated training. And then naturally in the beginning we are new devotees, we don't understand so much of the philosophy, but then Krishna at one point arranges that the older devotees are not close by, and we are faced with someone who's newer than we are, who's just coming, and then we surprise ourselves by starting to explain the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And then, and we go on speaking for an hour or more, and then we wonder, where does that come from? How, this is causeless. This is the process of learning, or the process of acquiring knowledge, is very, very different, completely different than what people do when they go to regular school and college. That is, acquisition of material knowledge is completely different than acquisition of transcendental knowledge. Because that knowledge, that original knowledge, is already within us, as we have mentioned, and also it is being revealed by Krishna. It is by Krishna's mercy that we can understand and at times explain more than we thought we knew or understood about the philosophy. Yeah. I read only half the purport. I did because the paragraph ends, and so usually when a paragraph ends, it doesn't mean it's the end of the purport. And actually, this was half of the. We'll read the other half real quick. Let's see. Yeah, we have a few minutes. The principles of knowledge and detachment are two important factors on the path of transcendental realization. The whole spiritual process leads to perfect knowledge of everything material and spiritual. Now that's important. Everything material and spiritual. What is beyond that? Nothing. And the results of such perfect knowledge are that one becomes detached from material affection and becomes attached to spiritual activities. Becoming detached from material things does not mean becoming inert altogether, as men with a poor fund of knowledge think. Nice karma means not undertaking activities that will produce good or bad effects. Negation does not mean negation of the positive. Negation of the non-essentials does not mean negation of the essential. You have to follow this carefully. Similarly, detachment from material forms does not mean nullifying the positive form. The Bhakti cult is meant for realization of the positive form. When the positive form means Krishna, that personality, that person, is realized, the negative forms are automatically eliminated. Therefore, with the development of the Bhakti cult, with the application of positive service to the positive form, that's very nice, the positive service to the positive form, one naturally becomes detached from inferior things, and he becomes attached to superior things. Similarly, the Bhakti cult, being the supermost occupation, we just read a few yesterday, it is the param dharma, being the supermost occupation of a living being, leads him out of material sense enjoyment. And that is a sign of a pure devotee. He is not a fool nor is he engaged in the inferior energies, nor does he have material values. This is not possible by dry reasoning. It actually happens by the grace of the Almighty. In conclusion, one who is a pure devotee has all other good qualities, namely knowledge, detachment, etc. But one who has only knowledge or detachment is not necessarily well acquainted with the principles of the Bhakti cult. Bhakti is the supermost occupation of the human being. Yeah. Any comments or questions? Or thoughts? Good thoughts? Yes?
This point that this whole spiritual process leads to perfect knowledge of everything material and spiritual. So I think Maharaj, that until one have the whole knowledge of material, and one cannot understand spiritual. So if we have not the whole knowledge of all material and the defects of this material contamination, so we cannot go in this spiritual process. But we see that after knowing also the material, one getting entangled in the Maya only. Why does this happen?
Because one hasn't the full knowledge of the material. Your point actually is that one who has full knowledge of the material. It's a very interesting point actually, because this is explained by our acharyas. In order for us to understand properly the spiritual, it is important to understand the material. In order to properly understand the Creator, the more we understand His creation, His energies, isn't it? So that is also that is the way of understanding the absolute truth. At the same time, yes, I mean, Vedic literature is giving us the opportunity to learn, because it's contained within the Vedas, within the Vedic literatures, both material knowledge and spiritual knowledge. But that material knowledge within the Vedas, these different material sciences that are explained, whether it's astronomy or cosmology or military science or Ayurveda, they are written by sages to begin with, and they are the mantras. It's all based on sutras and mantras. Within those mantras are connections actually with the Absolute, with Krishna ultimately. So when we learn that kind of material knowledge in that context, written by persons who are self-realized, then we make that more easily that connection. When people just learn about, just like in modern day society, for example, or for that matter, at any time in the history, when people, let's say scientists or educators, just learn about material things, they are hovering on the mental platform, and in this way they will not be able to understand the spiritual dimension. And your question is that we see that sometimes people, they learn about material things, but they are still, attached or entangled. Being attached means being entangled. Yes, because they have, for whatever different reason, they have not made that connection, the connection of the material with the spiritual, you see. And that's the situation for the vast majority of people. You know, we come in contact sometimes with very knowledgeable people, I mean, even the language they speak is like, we can't understand it. It goes over our head. There are many very intellectual people, many knowledgeable people about so many things, but they're not having access. Actually, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, I believe, makes the following observation, that too much of mental speculation, too much of material knowledge very often will make it difficult for one to actually come to that higher. Because people who hover on the mental platform, it's just like there is gross sense gratification. Majority of people are actually engaged in satisfying their senses in different ways. There's also subtle sense gratification. I had personal experience, especially when I was in Indonesia a few years back. One particular city is called it's a student city. Many universities. They have many conferences every year. And you have all of these intellectuals, these professors. It's not only in Indonesia, I mean, it's happening everywhere. People who have some ability to think out and to assimilate knowledge. It's a kind of intellectual gratification. They love giving their paper, presenting their paper, their theory, their understanding, and it's a kind of because it's on the false ego platform.
Fame.
Yes.
We have published this much.
Yeah, correct. Yes. So no amount of accumulated material knowledge, unless again, it's like our Sarvabhaumacharya was the greatest logician, the greatest philosopher, but impersonalist, and therefore he did not have access until he came in contact with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, with the whole realm of bhakti, isn't it? Yeah. And that's also confirmed by Lord Brahma. Vedeshu durlabham adurlabham atma bhakto. In the Brahma Samhita, Lord Brahma explains that one may study and read the Vedic literatures, for hundreds of years, but one will not, by one's own limited effort or imperfect intelligence, understand. Actually, one will not be able to actually enter into the inner realms that are contained in the Vedic literatures. That is only possible by the mercy, actually, of Vaishnavas, or by the direct mercy of Krishna. So simply acquisition of ordinary knowledge will not take us to the proper destination. We need to follow the prescribed method or process given in the Shastra. Yeah. Any other?
There is question in online.
Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, how to identify one's psychophysical nature and engage in Krishna's service?
How to recognize?
How to identify?
How to identify?
Yeah. One's psychophysical nature and engage in Krishna's service.
Yes. The beginning of that process is by chanting Hare Krishna, of course, and by associating with devotees. We were discussing just a few days ago that most of us who have not been exposed, let's say, to the Vedic culture when we were younger, because that is when one's psychophysical nature, which is connected actually with what role and position we are meant to play within society. It is when we are younger that this is generally understood, more easily understood. we were talking about how the local brahmanas in the village, they would actually identify the by following some specific methods, 4 particular methods, by which they would understand and identify the varna of an individual. And so even though we may not have had that kind of exposure at any time when we are fortunate to come in contact with Krishna consciousness, by taking up to the process, then to a large extent, through the process of purification, we can begin to understand more about our nature, our material nature, our spiritual nature, and also by taking guidance and assistance from senior Vaishnavas. Yeah. So the whole purpose of our Krishna consciousness movement, for example, of course, the ultimate primary purpose is to bring everyone to that spiritual and transcendental platform. But in order to facilitate coming to that platform, there is the recommended process in the Shastra of living a more simplified lifestyle. As Prabhupada many times would explain, the whole process of simple living facilitates that higher thinking, isn't it? So simple living has to do with reducing in so many different ways our entanglement with the material world, and that's of course a major topic in itself that we come across, of course, in the Bhagavatam, and that Prabhupada spoke about quite. In other words, one of our purposes is to create a situation, a social situation, to create communities whereby from an early age, because many of us, most of us actually, come to Krishna consciousness somewhat late in life, unless one is fortunate to have been born in a Vaishnava family, which is nowadays extremely rare, especially in the Western countries. Of course, now by Prabhupada's mercy, it's beginning to happen because the people are becoming devotees, etc. So the earlier one has an opportunity, and that's why, again, Gurukul culture, the culture of Gurukul, the culture of giving knowledge, training, education from as early age as possible, then it will prevent us, it will avoid so many problems or complexities in life for all of us. Most of us have missed out, have not had this kind of exposure to the Vedic culture when we were younger, and therefore so many complications are there. But regardless of when we begin the process, the more we apply the teachings that are there in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, especially in the matter of chanting and serving, then we will gradually more and more understand about our nature. Yeah. Any other?
One more question.
Mm.
Can you please throw some light? How can we as ordinary people help in establish Varnasrama?
How can we as ordinary people help?
Varnasrama.
Yes, there are many ways by which one can be involved in helping to establish Varnasrama means to establish the Vedic culture. The Vedic culture is based on Varnasrama, and one of the ways is to actually hear. For example, there is a series of lectures, 61 lectures given by Srila Prabhupada related to Varnasrama. Excerpts from those lectures, and we have those on our website, srisurabi.org. Reading literatures that explain about Varnasrama, like the book speaking about Varnasrama, becoming connected or associating with those devotees who are either involved in developing some community. This is happening more and more and will continue to happen more and more. And especially helping, for example, if someone is a parent, being connected with some community or with some gurukula. There are many ways by which we can more easily understand this dimension or this aspect of Prabhupada's mission, which is in the present context of modern day society is very much an urgent need that all of us should be aware of and involved. So one can, for example, here in India, India is one of the rare countries where there is a ministry, an actual ministry promoting Varnashram. There is no other country that I know of where they have an actual ministry for Varnashram. Actually, every country should have, if not a ministry, at least a department or a council promoting the whole ideology of. Prabhupada refers to Daiva Varnasrama as our divine culture. You know, people speak about culture. You should go to that country. They have such a different kind of culture. Well, Krishna consciousness, we have a unique culture which is referred to as divine because our culture brings us out of this material world. All the other cultures keep us in the material world. If our culture is not connected with, the divine, and by divine, of course, we mean Bhakti. Bhakti is that divine culture which very easily and very quickly will take us out of our entanglement in the material world. So it is that culture that Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita promote. It is that culture that Prabhupada was speaking about, and it is that culture which is like the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, which is an eternal culture. So anything that is eternal is to our advantage to catch up to it. If we miss out on something that's eternal, we're eternally missing out. If something is eternal, it is to our benefit and to our advantage to understand that and to apply it as well. Bhakti is eternal. Bhakti as a spiritual practice is eternal. Varnasrama dharma is also eternal. It's eternal in that it is the recommended lifestyle, the recommended process for those who come to the material world, for those who are caught up in the material world. It is that ideal process given by Krishna to more easily facilitate our exit from the material world. The sun has set. Actually, can you see the sun? It has already hidden behind us. So we will close for now. And let's see. We probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the class, just like we started the class about an hour ago. So the beginning of the class, today is the beginning of a new year. So we want to, although it's not really our Vedic culture, but since everyone is in that mood of wishing everyone a happy new year, we want to wish all the devotees sitting here, or those who are asking questions from far away, that we can all have. The only way to have a happy new year is by becoming divine in Krishna consciousness. And the only way to be divine in Krishna consciousness is by making a resolute determination on our part to associate on a regular basis with the knowledge and the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Jai Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki